A wealthy individual asks a modest woman to play piano, intending to embarrass her in front of his distinguished guests. The confident expression on his face turns to surprise when her fingers touch the keys. No one anticipated what followed when ability met pride in a memorable evening. Isabel Morrison tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear as she organized the music sheets for tonight's gala. At 30, she'd spent the last 5 years working as an event coordinator for Winthrey Entertainment, concealing her past as a concert pianist. The elegant cream dress she wore, her nicest, felt constraining compared to her usual practical attire, but tonight's charity gala required a certain appearance. Morrison. Mr. Winther wants all staff in the ballroom in 15 minutes, her colleague whispered, hurrying past with an armful of programs. Isabel nodded, her stomach tightening. The renowned Cornelius Winthrop, whose mansion she'd been working in for 3 days preparing this charity gala, was known for his stern personality and high standards. 3 event coordinators had been let go in the past month alone. Just get through tonight, she murmured to herself, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her dress. 5 years ago, she'd left her promising career after an unsuccessful performance at Carnegie Hall. Anxiety had overwhelmed her, her fingers stalling mid-concerto. The critics had been harsh. Now she organized events where others performed, staying safely in the background. The grand piano in the ballroom center gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Isabel ran her fingers along its edge before pulling away quickly. Some wounds were still too fresh. The pianist has called in sick, the supervisor announced, appearing suddenly beside her with a worried expression. Mr. Winthrop is upset. The guests arrive in an hour, and the entire program is centered around the musical performance. Isabel's heart raced. Has anyone called the agency for a replacement? Too late for that. Someone's going to have to tell him, and since you're handling the entertainment portion. The supervisor's voice trailed off meaningfully. I'll speak with him, Isabel said, straightening her shoulders. She'd dealt with challenging personalities before. This was just another wealthy client with high expectations. As if summoned by their concerns, Cornelius Winthrop appeared in the doorway. His silver hair and immaculate tuxedo conveyed influence and privilege. At 60, his face still retained the handsome features that had graced society pages for decades, now hardened by years of getting exactly what he wanted. His cool eyes swept the room before landing on Isabel. Everything better be perfect, he said, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of a man never told no. Isabel swallowed hard and stepped forward. Tonight was just another event to endure. She had no idea this evening would revive everything she'd tried to forget. The Winther Mansion was the pride of Westchester County. Marble columns stretched toward ornate ceilings, and valuable artwork adorned walls that had hosted presidents and royalty. In the grand ballroom where Isabel now stood, 3 crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the polished floor and the centerpiece, a magnificent Steinway concert grand piano worth more than Isabel's annual salary. Guests began arriving at precisely 7 o'clock. Women in designer gowns adorned with diamonds moved through the room, while men in tailored tuxedos discussed investments and vacation homes. Isabel worked efficiently between them, unnoticed in her role as staff despite her elegant dress. She monitored the waitstaff, checked the lighting levels, and ensured the champagne flowed freely. Everything must be perfect, Cornelius had instructed earlier, his steely gaze fixed on her. The annual charity gala was his showcase. Less about raising money for underprivileged children, and more about confirming his status among New York's elite. This event reflects directly on me. Isabel checked her watch for the 5th time in as many minutes. The evening's entertainment should have begun 15 minutes ago. The string quartet had played their intended opening set, and now an uncomfortable lull had settled over the gathering. She glanced at the empty piano bench and felt a familiar ache in her fingers, quickly suppressed. Is there a problem, Miss Morrison? The cool voice of Cornelius Winther interrupted her thoughts. He had appeared beside her silently, a flute of champagne held loosely in manicured fingers. "The pianist, sir. He's ill and won't be coming." She delivered the news with professional calm, preparing for his reaction. Cornelius's jaw tightened, the only visible sign of his displeasure. "Unacceptable. I have 70 of New York's most influential people here expecting a program. This reflects poorly on your organization. We've tried calling replacements, but on such short notice." "I don't pay your company to bring me problems," he interrupted, coolness in his voice. "I pay for solutions. Should I be looking for a more competent events team for next quarter?" Guests were beginning to murmur, glancing expectantly toward the piano. A few checked their watches. Isabel could feel the event she'd worked tirelessly to perfect beginning to unravel. "Perhaps we could move directly to dinner," she suggested, frantically calculating whether the kitchen could accommodate the schedule change. Cornelius looked at her with careful assessment, as if seeing her, really seeing her, for the first time. "No, we'll find another way to entertain my guests." He turned and strode toward the center of the room, leaving Isabel with a sense of approaching difficulty. Cornelius Winther gained the room's attention with a simple raised hand. The crowd, trained in the social etiquette of wealth, fell silent immediately. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Champagne glasses halted mid-sip. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly across the ballroom. "It seems our pianist has inconveniently fallen ill." He delivered the news as if the musician had deliberately undermined his event. "However, the evening won't be without music." Isabel moved toward the service exit, hoping to slip away and frantically call every musician in their contact list. The slight smile on Cornelius's lips should have warned her, but she was focused on saving the event. "Ms. Morrison, I believe you can help us." She stopped mid-step, turning slowly to face him. "Sir." Come, he beckoned her with manicured fingers. "Don't be modest." Confused, Isabel approached. The guests parted, creating a path to the grand piano at the center of the room. Whispers followed her. "Who is she? Is she the backup entertainment? Rather plain, isn't she?" "I happened to notice your resume when we were selecting event coordinators," Cornelius continued, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Juilliard graduate, weren't you?" Isabel felt the color drain from her face. Her past, the one she'd so carefully hidden, exposed in front of New York's elite. She deliberately omitted her musical background from recent applications, listing only her management experience. "That was a long time ago, Mr. Winther," she said quietly, aware of every eye in the room on her. "Nonsense," he replied, his voice tinged with challenge. "Talent doesn't simply disappear, does it? I believe in utilizing all available resources." He gestured toward the piano. The massive Steinway gleamed beneath the chandeliers, both inviting and intimidating. Isabel hadn't touched a piano in front of an audience in 5 years. Not since that night at Carnegie Hall, when her promising career had faltered in 7 devastating minutes. "I'm sure our guests would appreciate even an amateur performance," he added, emphasizing amateur with subtle intent. "Something simple to tide us over until dinner." The room's atmosphere shifted. Isabel recognized what was happening. She wasn't being offered an opportunity. She was being presented as entertainment of a different sort. Cornelius Winther expected her to perform poorly, providing his guests with an amusing story to share at their next social gathering. "I couldn't possibly," she began, struggling to maintain her composure. "I insist," he replied, the words pleasant, but his eyes cool. "Unless you prefer to find another position tomorrow. Your company values our contract, I'm sure." The implication hung in the air between them, disguised as professional courtesy, but unmistakable in its intent. "Well, Ms. Morrison," Cornelius's voice carried a hint of confidence. "Surely you can manage a simple piece for our guests. Consider it part of your duties this evening." 70 pairs of eyes fixed on Isabel. Women with perfect hairstyles and men with expensive watches stared. Cocktails paused midway to their lips, anticipating the scene Cornelius had orchestrated. A woman in a sapphire gown whispered something behind her hand, causing her companion to smile politely. Isabel recognized the situation. If she refused, she'd lose her job. If she played poorly, she'd become the evening's topic, the staff member who presumed talent she didn't possess. Either way, Cornelius would have his entertainment at her expense. Perhaps something easy, he suggested, his voice carrying false generosity. A nursery rhyme, maybe. Chopsticks. A few laughs rippled through the crowd, primarily from those standing closest to their host, eager to align themselves with his influence. Isabel's cheeks warmed. 5 years of hiding her past, of rebuilding her life piece by piece after her public setback. And now this man would undermine it all for his amusement. She glanced toward her supervisor, who stood by the wall, looking apologetic but unwilling to intervene. "The piano is quite expensive," Cornelius added. "A Steinway concert grand, imported from Germany specifically for my collection. I hope your abilities are worthy of it." She glanced at the instrument. Even from where she stood, she could tell it was perfectly tuned, its ebony surface reflecting the chandelier light like a dark mirror. The professional part of her mind estimated its value at over $150,000. Something changed inside her. Not just concern about Cornelius's behavior, but a deeper emotion. Loss for what she'd given up, for the music she'd abandoned out of fear. Her fingers suddenly ached with the memory of Chopin, Bach, Liszt, composers whose works had once flowed through her as naturally as breathing. "What would you like me to play, Mr. Winther?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. He raised an eyebrow, perhaps surprised by her compliance. "Surprise us. Though don't be too ambitious. We wouldn't want another incident, would we?" Another wave of polite laughter from his guests. The subtle reference to her Carnegie Hall disappointment affected her deeply. How much did he know? Had he researched her specifically for this moment? Isabel stepped toward the piano, her cream dress catching the light. The crowd parted, creating a path to her moment of truth. As she approached the bench, memories returned. Thousands of hours of practice, competitions won and lost, the joy of losing herself in the music until her fingers ached. And then the memory she tried hardest to suppress. The moment her mind had gone blank, when the music had stopped, and the uncomfortable silence of the audience had become her nightmare. Her hand trembled as she reached for the piano bench. The polished wood gleamed under the chandeliers, waiting like a judgment seat. For a brief moment, she considered walking away. Losing her job would be difficult, but wasn't this public exhibition worse? She could feel her heart pounding against her ribs, her breathing becoming shallow, the familiar signs of anxiety. As she sat down, the cool ivory keys stretched before her, a field of black and white. The familiar tension gathered between her shoulder blades. Her mind flashed back to that night at Carnegie Hall, the lights too bright, her breath too short, the pressure overwhelming her until her fingers froze mid-movement, leaving only devastating silence. Perhaps something from the sound of music. Cornelius suggested from somewhere behind her, eliciting more chuckles. "Those notes are numbered, aren't they? Even someone with basic training could manage that." Isabel closed her eyes. The room seemed to spin slightly, the murmurs of the wealthy audience turning into the rush of blood in her ears. 5 years she'd spent avoiding this moment. 5 years pretending that music was just a hobby she outgrown rather than the passion that had been disrupted. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling visibly. Someone coughed. A champagne glass clinked. Each second of hesitation confirmed what Cornelius wanted to prove, that she was out of place, a pretender, someone reaching beyond her station. "We're waiting, Ms. Morrison," Cornelius prompted, his voice carrying both impatience and satisfaction. "Our guests have busy schedules." Isabel took a deep breath. Behind her closed eyes, she saw her mother, a cleaning woman who had worked extra shifts to pay for piano lessons, who had believed in her talent even when they couldn't afford heat in their small apartment. She remembered her teacher at Juilliard who had said, "When you play, Isabelle, you speak truths others can only hint at." She opened her eyes. The keys waited, patient as old friends. What would she play? Something simple to endure the moment, or... Her left hand dropped to the lower register, her right poised above the middle keys. The choice was made. If this was to be her challenge, she would not retreat. Liszt. Someone in the crowd murmured as they recognized her position. "Is she attempting Liszt?" A woman in pearls whispered. "Surely not La Campanella. That's for accomplished performers." Cornelius's smile faltered slightly as he registered the meaning of these whispers. He'd expected Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, not one of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical repertoire. Isabelle took one final breath and embraced what she had been avoiding for 5 years. Whatever happened next would be on her terms, not his. The first notes of Liszt's La Campanella flowed through the ballroom like stones dropped in still water. Isabelle's fingers moved with deliberate precision, beginning the deceptively simple melody that would soon transform into one of the most technically challenging pieces in piano literature. The initial notes were like careful steps onto thin ice, testing whether it would support her weight. But as the familiar pattern engaged her muscle memory, something awakened within her. The years of avoidance and fear began to dissolve, replaced by the pure instinct of her training. When the piece accelerated, requiring impressive leaps across octaves, her hands became a blur. The notorious right-hand jumps that had challenged countless pianists flowed from her fingers as naturally as breathing. Notes cascaded, each one crystalline and perfect, building the energetic bell-like sound that gave the piece its name. Isabelle was no longer in Cornelius Winthrop's mansion. She was everywhere and nowhere, lost in the mathematics and emotion of Liszt's genius. Her body swayed slightly, her face transformed by the intensity of concentration and release. This wasn't just technical precision. This was artistry at its most genuine and honest. The room had gone completely silent. No clinks of glasses, no whispered conversations, not even breathing could be heard above the torrent of music pouring from the Steinway. The wealthy guests stood transfixed, cocktails forgotten in their hands, as they witnessed something many had paid hundreds of dollars for at Lincoln Center, but had never seen this intimately. A musician in full communion with a masterpiece. Cornelius himself had frozen near a marble column, his expression transformed from confident anticipation to stunned disbelief. He had intended to showcase her mediocrity, and instead had unwittingly provided a stage for excellence. As the piece raced toward its energetic conclusion, Isabelle's fingers danced across the keyboard in brilliant arpeggios and chromatic scales, each note distinct yet flowing into the next. Her hands crossed and recrossed, executing the challenging technical demands with a grace that belied their difficulty. Perspiration appeared on her forehead, but her concentration never wavered. The final notes, demanding and triumphant, rang out and then dissolved into silence. The last vibrations hung in the air like visible things, reluctant to fade. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Isabelle remained still, her hands finally at rest above the keys, her breath coming in small gasps. The silence was complete, entirely unlike the uncomfortable quiet of her Carnegie Hall disappointment. This silence was appreciation. The moment was interrupted only when an elderly man in the back dropped his champagne glass, the crystal breaking against the marble floor. No one turned to look. All eyes remained on Isabelle, the simple event coordinator who had just revealed herself to be something else entirely. She finally looked up, meeting Cornelius's stunned gaze across the room, allowing herself one moment of quiet validation. The silence lasted precisely 3 seconds before the room erupted. Applause crashed like a wave, surprising in its intensity. Women in designer gowns pressed manicured hands together with genuine enthusiasm. Men who discussed billion-dollar deals with reserved expressions now wore faces of astonishment. Isabel remained seated, her hands now resting in her lap, her breathing still uneven from the exertion of Liszt's demanding composition. She hadn't planned to play La Campanella. It had simply flowed from her fingers, her body remembering what her mind had tried to forget. A woman in a red gown near the front whispered audibly to her companion, "That's Isabel Morrison. She was destined for greatness before she disappeared from the classical scene. I saw her at Carnegie Hall that night." Isabel tensed. So someone had recognized her, had witnessed her greatest disappointment. She prepared herself for the whispers to shift from admiration to remembrance of her setback. "Extraordinary," an older gentleman said, approaching the piano with the confident stride of someone accustomed to authority. "Simply extraordinary. I'm on the board at the Philharmonic. We must talk. Where have you been all this time?" Others began to press forward, the invisible barrier between staff and guests suddenly dissolved by her performance. Business cards appeared from inner pockets. Questions flowed from all directions. "Do you perform regularly? Are you teaching currently? Would you consider a private engagement at my daughter's wedding? My foundation sponsors a recital series." Even the waitstaff had paused. Trays of hors d'oeuvres tilted slightly as they stared at their colleague with newfound respect. The supervisor's mouth hung slightly open, champagne forgotten in her hand. Only then did Isabel dare to look for Cornelius Winthrop. He stood exactly where she'd left him, his posture rigid, his expression impossible to read. The confident smile had vanished, replaced by something complex. Shock certainly, perhaps displeasure, and something else that might have been respect. Their eyes met across the crowd now surrounding her. For a moment, the room seemed to fall away, leaving just the two of them in silent acknowledgement. He had intended to embarrass her, to reinforce the hierarchy between them. Instead, she had revealed herself as his equal, perhaps even his superior in a realm he couldn't touch. He gave her the slightest nod, almost imperceptible, before turning away. It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. From a man like Cornelius Winthrop, that was significant. "Darling, you must play something else," urged a diamond-adorned woman, breaking the moment. "Chopin, perhaps? His Ballade in G minor." Isabel turned back to the piano, a smile forming on her lips. For the first time in 5 years, her fingers longed to create music again. The fear that had hindered her for so long seemed to have dissolved in the aftermath of Liszt's notes. "The Ballade in G minor it is," Isabel announced, her voice steady now as she began Chopin's haunting masterpiece. She felt a freedom she'd forgotten existed. Each phrase flowed with emotional authenticity, the technically demanding passages serving the music rather than her concern about judgment. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Cornelius standing alone by the French doors, watching her with an intensity that might have unsettled her earlier. Now, lost in Chopin's storytelling, she was beyond reach. The narrative of the Ballade unfolded beneath her fingers, tender in moments, powerful in others, always emotionally truthful. When the final chords resounded through the ballroom, the audience erupted again, more enthusiastically than before. This wasn't polite applause. This was recognition of exceptional artistry. As she stood to acknowledge their response, a distinguished older woman with perfectly styled silver hair approached her. "Ms. Morrison, I'm Eleanor Harbrook of the Westchester Arts Foundation. We've been searching for a new artistic director for our piano competition. After tonight's performance, I believe you're exactly who we need." Before Isabel could respond, others crowded around, offering cards, making proposals. The attention in the room had shifted. These elite New Yorkers now focused on her. Across the room, Cornelius's assistant director approached him, speaking urgently. Isabel caught fragments. Popular on social media already. 3 guests, streaming the performance. Manhattan Classical Review editor was here. Cornelius nodded briefly before making his way toward Isabel. The crowd parted for him automatically, influence recognizing influence. "Miss Morrison," he said, his tone carefully measured. "It seems I misunderstood your qualifications." No apology, but from a man like Cornelius Winthrop, this was the closest thing to one. "It seems you did," she replied simply. A flash of something, annoyance, respect, crossed his face before he regained his composure. "I would like to discuss the possibility of you performing at our autumn gala as well. As the featured artist, naturally." His words were smooth, his recovery swift. Already he was repositioning himself as her patron rather than her critic. Isabel considered him, this man who had intended to make her uncomfortable, and was now trying to claim credit for discovering her. She thought of all the times powerful men had directed her path. Professors who insisted on their interpretation, conductors who dismissed her questions, critics who judged her worth based on a single performance. "I'll have my agent contact you," she said, surprising herself with the words. "My schedule fills quickly." She turned back to Eleanor Harbrook, leaving Cornelius momentarily at a loss for words, perhaps for the first time in his privileged life. "About the artistic director position," Isabel said, "I'd love to hear more." 2 months later, Isabel sat in her new office at the Westchester Arts Foundation, reviewing applications for the upcoming Young Pianist competition. A framed news article hung on the wall. "Unexpected star. The Cinderella pianist of Winthrop Gala returns to spotlight." The article detailed her unexpected comeback, tactfully omitting the circumstances that had led to her performance. The night that had begun as her discomfort had transformed into her renewal. Videos of her performance had spread across social media, gathering millions of views. Former colleagues from Juilliard had reached out. Her agent, yes, she had an agent now, handled daily requests for performances and interviews. Her first official concert since that challenging night at Carnegie Hall was scheduled for next month. The tickets had sold out in under an hour. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Morrison, your 4 o'clock is here," her assistant announced, looking in. Isabel smiled. "Send her in, please." A girl of about 12 entered, holding sheet music, her eyes widening at the baby grand piano in the corner of Isabel's office. Unlike the luxurious Steinway at Winter's mansion, this was a modest instrument, but it produced a warm, inviting tone. "You must be Lucia," Isabel said warmly. "I understand you're interested in our scholarship program." The girl nodded shyly. "Yes, ma'am. My mom cleans houses, but she says music is important. I practice on a keyboard at the community center." Isabel's heart responded, recognizing her younger self in this child. "Well, let's hear what you can do." As Lucia approached the piano, Isabel noticed her worn shoes and carefully mended dress. The girl's hands, however, moved with natural grace as she began a simple Mozart sonata. Her technique was unpolished, but showed remarkable intuition. "Some people thought I didn't belong at the piano either," Isabel said after Lucia finished. "They were incorrect." The girl looked up, hope appearing in her eyes. "We start lessons next week," Isabel decided. "The scholarship is yours." Later, driving home, Isabel passed the Winthrop mansion on the hill, its windows glowing with warm light against the twilight sky. Cornelius had sent flowers after the gala, along with an offer to fund a concert series with her as the centerpiece. She had declined respectfully. Some connections weren't meant to be re-established. She thought of Lucia's face when the girl realized her dreams weren't impossible after all. That was the true power of music, not in society galas or viral videos, but in its ability to transform lives from the inside out. Isabel had been directed to the piano by a man's insensitivity, but she had reclaimed it through her own courage. Some talents can't remain hidden forever, and some lights refuse to be dimmed, no matter how long they've been covered. Her fingers tapped the steering wheel, already composing tomorrow's possibilities. Remember, Sometimes our greatest strengths emerge when others try to reveal our perceived limitations. Perhaps you have a talent waiting to be rediscovered. The most beautiful symphonies often come from those who once believed their music was silenced forever.